All right, let's go ahead and get this started. Wait for some people to show up in the chat. Okay, so this is a follow-up to mhswoocer's last Rise video, and I figured, I reacted to the other one, I might as well do a follow-up too. Only makes sense, right? This time he's talking about Sunbreak, which is interesting because I thought in the last video he would actually cover Sunbreak, but I think he was talking about just base Rise. So, yeah. All right, we've got someone in the chat. Let's go ahead and start reacting.
A little over a year after the polarizing launch of Monster Hunter Rise, its expansion, Sunbreak, would release. An expansion that would go on to be considered one of the best, if not the very best game in the series.
Ooh,
Naturally, I
big
want to
claims.
explain how such a dramatic turnaround could have occurred, yet I also want to discuss something even more important, something I haven't seen anyone else talk about before regarding these games. I have a
Okay.
theory that Capcom may have tried to send a message through this game's mechanics and its story, yet with the launch of Wilds and the reception of that game, it's clear that we totally missed it. So let's take a deeper look at this
You
expansion,
did.
see
All
what
right.
makes it so great, and in doing so, unravel this ridiculous conspiracy theory to share that message with you today. So
That's
last time we
intrigue.
talked about how Rise is a game that, while undeniably a little rough at launch, was incredibly underrated and misunderstood. Despite this
Okay.
though, the game still wasn't perfect, far from it, and Capcom knew that they had to do better. So, as they've been doing since the very first game in the series, they began creating an expansion, one that would aim to fully realize the true potential of Rise. This is what every expansion in these games does. They add new monsters, they refine the mechanics a bit, expand on the story, and maybe add some unique gimmick like Valor and Alchemy style in GU, Y Stones in 4U, and the one that I'm ever grateful to never have to see again in Iceborne. Sunbreak was no different. It was an expansion with higher stakes, a better story and characters, a brilliant endgame grind, and what I personally believe to be the best combat in the entire series. Depending on the day of the week. Look, we're comparing LeBron and Jordan here. These games all have insanely good combat. Although, if the combat is so great in all
Wilds?
of them, then what exactly makes the combat in Sunbreak stand out? Well,
Yeah,
I'm
tell
glad
me,
you asked.
please.
Check this out. Through this entire combat section, there are two words that I want you to hold on to. In fact, here, take this patent pending swoocer folder, write them down on a sheet of paper, and toss them both in there so that you don't lose them. The words are speed and precision. Keep
Oh,
in mind,
Lord.
you're not looking for these exact words. I mean, they do come up about this many times in the script, but focus more on what those words mean and you'll start to notice a really cool pattern emerging here. I'll begin with something that I left out of the Rise video, and one of the best additions
Okay.
to both base Rise and the expansion in Sunbreak, the subscribe button. Oh, hold
Oh,
on, no, not that. While it's here though,
nice.
you might as well hit it so that you can say you were here before 100k. Anyway, switch skills. I want to talk about switch skills. Switch skills are particularly clever due to the customization that they allow for, but even more important than that is their simplicity. So as a quick refresher, switch skills were alterations to individual moves that effectively allowed you to create your own moveset for any given weapon. For example, the switch axe has two switch skills called Soaring Wyvern Blade and sorry, I'm forgetting the second example. What
Because nobody used it.
was I gonna use here? It was something Gambit? Valorous Gambit? No. Maybe Unbreakable Gambit? No, that's... Oh, right, it was Gambit.
Okay.
These two skills are both...
Not now, ads.
I've always wanted to do that. These two skills are both mapped to the same input. Invincible Gambit launches you forward with a bunch of super armor and a quick flurry of axe swings. Soaring Wyvern Blade, on the other hand, launches you into the air before allowing you to dive down with a quick elemental discharge that explodes on a delay. You can even use it as a direct follow-up to a ZSD. Both of these skills have countless applications in the Switch Axe's moveset, and if you're a fellow cultured Switch Axe user, you can already imagine how and when you might use them. But these switch skills aren't just for wire bug attacks, they change your normal attacks as well. For example, the Swax's elemental discharge has two variants. One is the normal stab with an explosion after a set time, while the other is a safer attack called compressed finishing discharge. That second one has super armor, and while slightly weaker, it's significantly faster, unleashing all of your damage in a single attack. Once again, you can probably imagine the applications of both of these, yet here it's a bit different. See, in my experience, especially late in the base game of Rise, the normal elemental discharge was simply too risky to use against these more powerful monsters. Lashing onto the wrong part at the wrong time all but guaranteed a cart. Because of this, I'd rarely, if ever, use that first version. This was a little disappointing too, since it's not like elemental discharge is a bad attack. It's just useful maybe 25% less often than the compressed variant. This is a problem that you could see in plenty of the switch skills on other weapons too. The pair of Silkbind Sakura Slash and Soaring Kick for the longsword is probably the most clear example of this. Both of these switch skills are incredible. One gives you a free level up for your longsword, while the other one drains your levels for an exceptionally powerful attack. But because they're a pair, you have to choose one. That was the biggest problem with switch skills in Rise. Even if a skill was only 10% better, once you enter a hunt, you have to use it 100% of the time. If only there was some kind of tool that let you, I don't know, alternate between these switch skills. Oh look, the best mechanic in Monster Hunter. Switch skill swap is... Oh yeah, I should probably do that. I'll be quick. Listen, you've seen it everywhere. Opinions and nuance basically don't exist anymore. You could say something like, these are my 5 favorite games, and someone will unironically look you in the eye and go, what do you mean you have this subjective work of art over this equally subjective work of art? Your subjective list based on your own personal opinion is objectively incorrect. Or you'll see the classic extremes of this game is perfect and anyone who disagrees is brain dead, and this game is absolute trash and anyone who disagrees is brain dead. Sometimes these two statements will be said about the very same game. This kind of discourse drives me crazy, and it's part of why I made this channel in the first place. I want to do everything I can to create more nuanced discussions about this medium using these videos, and if that's something you want to do as well, you can help me out by supporting me on Patreon. You'll get early videos, bonus videos, your name in the credits, and in-progress updates. More than all of that, you'll be supporting an attempt to make online discourse 1% more tolerable, and I think that's pretty important. Thank you so much for the support. It makes longer videos like this possible. Speaking of which, we've got a lot to discuss, so let's get back to it. Switch skill swap is genius. In the same way that switch skills worked because of how simple the concept was, switch skill swap focuses on simplicity above all else. There's this expression in editing that goes, the perfect cut is invisible, with the idea being that if you cut at just the right moment, the viewer shouldn't even notice that you did it. That's what I feel is the perfect way to enhance a mechanic in a game as well. New additions shouldn't feel forced, they should feel so obvious and seamless that a few hours in, you're using them in such a natural way that you forget there was ever a game without them. I'm getting ahead of myself though. What is switch skill swap? How does it actually work? Well, check this out. You've got two scrolls, red and blue. When you swap, you switch from red to blue or from blue to red. When you do this, you can also dodge in any direction, allowing you to quickly switch, then jump out of harm's way or otherwise reposition yourself. There are even certain skills you can use to add extra effects to these swaps, like a parry or some health recovery. These scrolls themselves are switch skill loadouts that you can arrange before a hunt begins. I really can't stress how impactful this seemingly minor addition is. Why exactly this works so well all comes down to two reasons. First is synergy. We can look back at the longsword to see a great example of how this works. Remember those two skills from before, Silkbind Sakura Slash and Soaring Kick? Well now, instead of choosing between the two, you can chain them into each other. Drop a Sakura Slash to first level up your longsword, then switch, then go straight into a Soaring Kick to use that extra level that you just gained. Longsword is far from the only weapon that can do things like this. Dual Blades can use their Piercing Bind attack, then switch straight into a Spiral Slash. Charge Blade can use a combination of the Elemental Sword, delayed firing pins, and the Savage Axe to set up massive yet precise bursts of damage on individual parts. And Switch Axe can use a combination of Switch Charger and Elemental Burst Counter to set up a parry that basically never runs out. The synergy between some of these skills feels almost like they planned to have this mechanic in the game from the very start, but decided to save it for the expansion since it might be a bit overwhelming to have all all of these options in the base game. However, there is a second, almost mirrored version of why this mechanic is so great. You see, switch skill swap can effectively create two different loadouts for your weapon. Dual blades are my personal favorite example of this, as they're probably the most extreme. The skills Tower Vault and Demon Flight literally give the dual blades an upgraded version of aerial style from Generations. You can throw those skills on one scroll, and then something like Iron Shine Silk and Spiral Slash on the second. This effectively allows you to switch between a grounded style to maintain sharpness and an aerial style for damage and mounts. It's not just about these more extreme examples though. In this most recent playthrough I used Charge Blade, and with it I had two setups, one defensive and one offensive. I'd swap between the two depending on what state the monster was in and how I was playing during any given hunt. If I felt I was playing particularly well, I could really take advantage of that by switching to the higher risk, higher reward style. However, if I was doing what I normally do, getting slapped around like a ragdoll with far too much confidence for his own good, I could swap to my defensive style. I could go on for hours about how great this mechanic is, and honestly I really want to. But tell you what, since there's quite a lot more to cover with this game and we do have to move on, if you used switch skill swap, drop your personal favorite combos in the comments. I'm curious what kind of setups you might have run. Back up a second though, you might have noticed some strange wording there.
Strange wording. Dixie please.
Behind this advisor are Vanguard's institutional quality.
You know, I'm just gonna talk during these ads from now on. I think that's a pretty
If
good
you
use of
use
the time.
switch skill swap. See, that's the final hidden reason why this mechanic works so well as an enhancement to the base game's switch skill system. You're not required to use it. The game doesn't cut your damage in half if you don't swap every 90 seconds. If you feel like you don't need it, you can just ignore it. Granted, I do think you're missing out if you do choose to ignore it, but that choice is yours to make. All that said, this might start to sound a little overpowered, right? I mean, back in Generations you actually had to choose between aerial and adept style. Here though, you can basically use both at the same time. Well, the game balances this out in a few ways. First is the fact that you're still limited to just 2 or 3 wire bugs. You're gaining new moves, yet you have the same restrictions as you did in Rise. If you use that longsword combo from earlier with Silkbind Sakura Slash into Soaring Kick, you'd better be sure the monster can't follow up with anything, since if it does, you don't have any wire bugs to bail yourself out. Speaking of monsters, that's the second half of both the combat and the title of the series. So let's take a closer look at them, since that's where our true solution to these potentially overpowered hunters lies. While the message at the end may be more significant, this might be the single most important part of the entire video. There's this rather frustrating misconception that monsters in Rise and Sunbreak are just punching bags thanks to the abilities of the hunters. And while that's certainly true for early game Rise, by mid-game and especially late game Sunbreak, that statement couldn't be further from reality. You see, the monsters here are designed around these new abilities that the hunters have access to. This is a trend that we could start to see flashes of in late game Rise, but here they really push that idea to its limits. Every monster in Sunbreak has multiple follow-ups for nearly all of their attacks. In fact, it's almost difficult to find an attack that doesn't have a follow-up. These follow-ups vary in speed and damage, so some of them aren't nearly as threatening as others, yet still, they all force you to consider how and when you're using these new abilities of yours. Remember from last time that wirefalls, counters, special attacks, and even movement are all tied to these 2 or 3 wire bugs. That means that recklessly throwing out attacks and counters without a care in the world can put you in extremely dangerous and even deadly positions. Furthermore, these follow-ups can actually invalidate your counters altogether. Garen Golem has this triple slam attack that I want you to pay close attention to, since it's hiding a clever trick. Check it out. Obviously these 3 hits have the potential to punish an early counter, but that's not really the trick we're worried about. Here, take a look at another example and see if you can notice it. These are what I like to call fake outs. Take a closer look at that triple slam. Notice how there's a slight delay after the first hit? The body slam is even trickier. There's no hitbox on the way up. When Garen Golem jumps into the air, there's nothing to counter. It's when the monster slams down a moment later that the attack becomes a threat. This is a trick you'll see constantly in Sunbreak, and it forces you to prioritize precision over reaction. A lot of the counters in this game will only block one attack, or will go straight into the offensive follow-up after their parry. If you counter the first hit of an attack without considering the follow-up, you'll get punished. Now, of course, there are still one-size-fits-all solutions and choose to lose weapons like dual blades, but if that's a flaw, and candidly I don't think it is, then it's a flaw with the entire series, not just this game. This might come across as a shot at dual blade mains. It's not. I main dual blades for my first 200 hours in the series. You guys are great. I have nothing against you. That deliberate nature of combat does still exist here, yet where I think it truly shines is in the mechanics of each individual monster. You see, in an interview for Wilds, director Yuya Tokuda mentioned that they try to select what monsters would be best for the game based on that game's theme. The example they use is Gravios Gyarados being selected for wilds thanks to the focus mechanic allowing for precise targeting on the softer spots of its otherwise hard exterior. Now
What a
Tokuda
lie.
didn't direct Rise, that was Ichinose, but you can see a bit of that idea in this game as well. Monsters are selected and created to complement and synergize with the fundamental values of that individual entry. Let me give you a few examples. Anjanath isn't perfect for a game like this because it was a fan favorite in World. If that were the case, Nergigante would have been here. Anjanath was chosen because when it charges up its fire breath, its throat begins to glow. If you deal enough damage to this specific spot, you can knock it down and cancel its attack.
Everybody's got auras in this
Astalos, a
game, that's
Sunbreak
true.
exclusive monster, returned from Generations over Glavenus or Gammoth. This could be because Gammoth is too big and Glavenus was just an Iceborne. More likely though is the fact that Astalos 2 promotes that idea of targeting specific parts for a knockdown. When the monster charges up, the wings, the tip of its tail, and the top of its head all begin to glow a bright green. Deal enough damage to them and you can knock the monster down and out of its charged state. Even with newer monsters like Garen Golem,
Yeah, a lot
you
of
can see
monsters
this
have
idea of
these
rewarding
aura
careful
things
precision
now,
instead of wild and
ultimately the
reckless
same kind of thing.
offense. Garen Golem has this mechanic where it'll coat its fists in mossy and volcanic rocks. These expand its moveset, granting it access to new attacks and movement abilities, along with status effects like Water Blight and Blast Blight. Once again though, if you deal enough damage to either one of these, you can break them and cause a knockdown. I really can't stress this enough. This is a trend that exists in nearly every single monster in both the base game and especially the expansion. It's an extremely important trend too. Without these mechanics, you'd have no reason to do anything but attack as often as possible, wherever and whenever you could. However, thanks to both this and those fake outs and follow-ups, the combat becomes far more methodical and precise than it may look on the surface. If you only watch clips of this game, you may believe it's just a mediocre, mindless mash fest where you mount multiple meaningless monsters. Yet when
Or
you
maybe if you
actually
play
play
it,
it, and especially when you take a deeper look at all the moving parts here, you quickly realize that it's far deeper and more intricate than it seems. This is where we can finally go back to that folder from before, the one about speed and precision. Sunbreak is a game that doesn't merely ask you to play fast and execute these over-the-top counters and finishers. It's a game that asks you to do this with intent, with deliberation, and of course, with precision. Claiming that this game is just mindless counters and silkbind spam completely misses the point of what the combat is trying to do. Furthermore, and perhaps most importantly, it's a strategy that simply will not work once you reach the threats that await you in the endgame. We'll come back to this idea when we get there, so write down big 3 on that sheet of paper and toss it back in your folder. Just make sure you don't lose it. Look at me, don't lose it.
All right.
When
Dang.
we won James Beard.
As a pastry chef and the woman-owned business, it's everything.
I think for like specific
University
weapons,
of Phoenix is built for real life.
I think maybe it matters more than others, but the vast
vast
majority of them kind of feel like that.
Okay, let's move on. What is the goal of a sequel? This question has countless different answers that vary based on context, yet in most cases the broad answer that almost always applies is that sequels are meant to improve upon their predecessor, raise the stakes, and tell an even more exciting, emotional, or otherwise engaging story. Just like in the gameplay section, this all revolves around 2 ideas that I want you to keep in mind: show don't tell, and restraint. These are way more obvious than the whole speed and precision thing. Sunbreak and all other expansions in Monster Hunter are basically sequels. They've got most of the same characters, the same world, and they take place shortly after the events of the base game. What's really interesting about Sunbreak as a sequel is that it doesn't simply focus on improving the gameplay, it enhances the characters and the story too. Crucially, it does so with that very same show don't tell idea that made Rise's story so great, while introducing my personal favorite cast of characters in the entire series. And not just because of how they're written, but because of how their individual personalities are displayed through the gameplay itself. So let's start with a quick synopsis. On the off chance that you haven't watched the previous video, haven't played Monster Hunter Rise, and care about spoilers for that game, this is your warning. Granted, I understand this warning is relevant for roughly 3 individuals, but to those 3, don't worry, I got you. Seriously though, why are you watching a video on Sunbreak if... Sorry, never mind. So the Rampage in Rise was a horde of rampaging monsters that we later find out are actually fleeing from these 2 elder dragons, Narwa and Ibushi. The 2 are trying to get a little freaky and basically take over the world while they're at it. We put a stop to that, chill for a few weeks to months, and suddenly a crab shows up. This event is extremely significant for 2 reasons. First, it kicks off the story of Sunbreak, and second, it immediately shows us what's at stake instead of merely telling us. Daimyo Hermitar doesn't belong in the Shrine Ruins. It's an invasive species. We know the monsters that are supposed to be here, and this is not one of them. The reason this is happening is actually rather similar to the Rampage, but this is where we can start to see those heightened stakes. Shortly after defeating the crab, this creature shows up, and just before it can turn this into the darkest Monster Hunter game by making Utsushi into a fond memory, this is Fear Rain. She's the GOAT. She comes from a land simply known as the Kingdom, and there's a bit of a problem going on. To paraphrase, we're asked to come to Elgato Outpost and help stop the Elder Dragon Malzeno, who's controlling these flying parasites called Curio that are upsetting the ecosystem over there. Surely rushing in blindly to take out Malzeno will solve the problem and not cause any unintended consequences like it did in this game, or this game. Jokes aside, once again, this is causing a migration of monsters, much like the Rampage. The reason the stakes are so much higher this time though is the scale. Remember how in Rise we saw these villages that were destroyed by monsters? Well, we've got ruins here in Sunbreak too. However, this time they're far more unsettling. The ruins here are found in a new map called the Citadel, a map that contains an enormous stronghold with equally massive Dragonators on either side of the gates. This place wasn't just a sitting duck that got trampled. No, this was a fortress. A well-defended, fully prepared fortress. Yet none of that preparation mattered. It wasn't enough. The threat posed by Malzeno was simply too great. So of course, this thing has to be stopped. But as bad as it sounds, it's not until we're sent into one of the greatest quests in the series that we're truly able to understand that things aren't quite what they seem, and are actually far worse than we could have possibly imagined. Before we get there, we need to look at the characters since there are some events in the story that directly relate to them and help enhance that quest. The number one reason Sunbreak's characters stand out so much compared to every other game that came before it is the new follower system. The follower system allows NPCs at the outpost to fight alongside you in quests, much like normal players would. This is introduced pretty early on. You go out to fight a variant of Bishitan that decides fruits are a little too safe. It prefers to use bombs. Fiorraine sees this and instantly volunteers to help you on this quest. She does so rather enthusiastically as well, briefly showing us an aspect of her character that'll be important later. She's basically the perfect knight, with all of the self-sacrifice and borderline unhealthy sense of responsibility that comes with that title. Something that the commander of the outpost, Admiral Gallius, scolds her for while mentioning... I wonder if that'll be important later too.
You know you could be vaping formaldehyde, which is used
Yeah, but
in
the Sunbreak story is
taxidermy.
really good.
Yeesh.
I figured that they would make that maybe the new standard, but I don't think they told the Wilds crew.
Probably not. What's especially cool here is that these attributes of Fiorraine's character are reflected in her gameplay as a follower. She plays a mixture of support and DPS, focusing on dealing damage of course, but also on stunning the monster with flash bombs or healing the player if their health gets too low. If you look closely when she does this, you can notice an extremely subtle detail. She's not actually waiting for her health to drop when she uses her life powders. She's doing it when your health drops. See? Notice how she's at max health here, yet she's still using a life powder. The reason this is such an important detail is because life powders heal the user as well. Technically, the optimal way to use this item is to wait until both your party and you have recoverable health. In doing so, you'd get more healing and by extension value out of the same item. Despite this, she still uses life powders even at max health, further emphasizing the protect everyone else at all costs quality of her character. A much more extreme example of this is the hilarious fan favorite Luchika. We're told in passing that nobody likes to hunt with her because, despite her calm demeanor at the outpost, once she enters a hunt, she's completely insane. This is something that, once again, is directly shown to us through the gameplay. First off, she has an endless supply of large barrel bombs. This isn't a figure of speech, I've literally never seen her run out. She'll use these explosives with reckless abandon as well. While every other follower in the game will place bombs next to a sleeping monster only after you yourself do so first, the instant Luchika notices a monster looking even the slightest bit dazed, she'll get to work. Oftentimes, I don't even have my weapons sheathed by the time she's placing them. She also just fights in an extremely reckless and hyper-aggressive way, getting KO'd more often than any other follower in my experience by far, but also dealing the most damage. It's not hard to see why other hunters would be reluctant to fight alongside her. I mean, if you get stunned, instead of lightly tapping you to wake you up without dealing damage, you know, like a well-adjusted individual would, she will throw a bomb at you. Jay, the newest knight and a bit of a rookie, also demonstrates his character through the gameplay. This one is extremely subtle, and I didn't catch it until this most recent playthrough where I was actively looking for stuff like this. Most of the followers will set traps for monsters, and Jay is no different. When he does it though, he'll stand directly on top of the trap. If you've played enough Monster Hunter, you already know the mistake he's making. Sure, this'll bait the monster to run into the trap, but it'll also... rookie mistake. What all these little show don't tell moments do is create a cast of characters that feels far more real than any other has in the past. Jay's personal trait of being a rookie isn't simply that, a personal trait written to enhance his character. It's something I've actually seen and experienced when fighting alongside him. Theo doesn't go around saying how badly she wants to help people. No, she actually does it. She helps you and the other members of the party directly during hunts. That's why these characters are so great, and why it hurts so much when... I think it's the context surrounding moments like these that make them so impactful. This is not the first Monster Hunter game to injure one of its main characters, but this time it feels so different because even if you're pretty sure everything's gonna be alright by virtue of this being a Monster Hunter game, you as the player are directly affected by this change. You can't use Fiorraine as a follower after she gets hurt.
Oh,
She doesn't
yeah.
show up on the title screen anymore,
Well,
and
that's
she's
crazy.
nowhere to be found in the outpost. Furthermore, this is almost exactly what we were warned about earlier in the expansion. Fiorraine was clearly told that if she keeps rushing blindly into danger, she's going to get herself hurt, and that's exactly what happened here. On the opposite side of the coin, that concern for our friend is contrasted with an even greater reason to stop Malzeno. So to keep things brief, we save Fiorraine and she joins us to fell the dragon once and for all. Yet upon doing so, things don't get better, they actually get worse. I love how you can see this reflected in the hub area. The sky becomes overcast and wind tears through the outpost, causing flags to whip around violently. It all creates this ominous sense of impending disaster. You see, Malzeno was a threat, there's no denying that, but much like our rival Magnamalo back in Rise, this monster wasn't the source of all of our problems. In fact, Malzeno's story is far more tragic than Magnamalo's. To understand why, what do you say we finally take a look at that quest I mentioned earlier? The best quest in the game and one of the best in the entire series. Gathering of the Curio. You probably already understand how Show Don't Tell plays into Sunbreak's story and characters. However, this is where we can get a better look at that second idea. Restraint. This may be the most disturbing and chilling quest in the series, so let's go through it and see why. It all starts with the build-up. After defeating Malzeno, we're told that the Curio aren't going away, and in fact, bafflingly, as Elgato's lead researcher Bahari puts it, the Curio seem happy. This confirms that while the Curio worked alongside Malzeno, the two weren't exactly best friends. Malzeno didn't create them, nor does it control all of them. After learning this, we're told that the Curio are gathering in the Citadel for some reason, so we're given a quest to investigate and to take out a strange Lunagaron that we find there. Why is that name in red now? Are we gonna fight a demon?
Yes.
Never mind, keep moving. So we head to the
Was
Citadel,
there any
which is
ever
now
doubt?
coated in an unnaturally dark and desaturated hue. More disturbingly though, for the first time in the game, for reasons we don't understand, it's quiet. Nearly all of the endemic life, including the Speary birds, are gone. There are no small monsters here either, and the only large monster we see on the map is Lunagaron. As we'll soon find out though, that's not really the only monster here. No, there are plenty of them, they're just... What's especially unsettling is that upon closer inspection, you can clearly see that these monsters don't have any external injuries. You may think this was all done by a rampaging Lunagaron, but that's probably not the case. What's far more likely is that the Curio did this and that Lunagaron is simply the only monster left. That's why it's so quiet here. The Curio came in and consumed every living thing in the area. What makes this feel so different from Rise's villages that foreshadowed what could happen to Kamara is that we're actively watching the end of the world unfold in real time. We can clearly see this once vibrant area full of life is now empty. This is what the entire world will look like if we don't find a way to stop the Curio. What happened to Fiorraine will happen to practically everyone.
Yeah, I think it's honestly a really good way to set up a story like that.
I'm Gus, and my job is to make you happy.
You know, it
So
doesn't
I
seem like it's
recommend
that
Optimum
hard to
Internet.
really,
It's
make
famously
something
fast
like
and
that.
starts at only
I don't know why
$25.
it's such a challenge
Everywhere.
for like Wilds.
What I especially love about this atmosphere is that it actually alters the gameplay too. Without Speary birds, your stats are lower than normal. No endemic life means no lantern bug for extra defense, no spiders to slam monsters into walls, and no random heals in the environment. Furthermore, since Lunagaron is the only living thing here, there's no wyvern riding either. All of that would have been bad enough, but to make matters worse, Lunagaron has this inexplicable new phase where it begins glowing a nightmarish red and gets even more
why didn't
aggressive.
they do
this
more
creates
of
a feeling
this?
to the gameplay that's just
Like,
as
this is just
unsettling
one
as
quest,
the story,
but,
the
like, if they
environment, and
kept this
presentation are trying
mechanic
to tell.
and
Crucially,
had it
there's
for
this
other
feeling
quests,
of restraint
if
in
you
all
like
of
that,
this.
that would've been
We
sick.
don't watch the monsters get drained by the Curio one by one in a cutscene, nor is there some dramatic 5-minute monologue from a character talking about how dire the situation looks. Every little detail isn't spoon-fed to you. The game assumes that you have eyes and at least 4 functioning brain cells, and actually considers letting you use them. As outstanding as this quest is though, it all merely serves to set the stage for one of the most terrifying monsters in the series.
Ah yes, Primordial's punching bag.
This scene perfectly combines both of those ideas from the start, show don't tell and restraint. The contrast between the quiet, chilling, and empty quest just before Geismagorm's arrival and the disastrous over-the-top scene here is brilliant. That restraint used in the gathering of the Curio quest makes this moment hit even harder, and the show don't tell nature of the rest of the game makes it so much more thrilling when they finally do decide to give us one of these more dramatic showcases. Things like Luchika jumping up to blast a boulder at the last second, or Admiral Gallius aura farming are so much more impactful explicitly because we've gotten to know their characters through the gameplay. Geismagorm isn't dead after we use a Dragonator to... Oh, that wasn't enough. Okay, just try another. Alright, this is getting out of hand. Astonishingly, that thing is probably still alive, so now we've got to jump down after it and finish the job. We'll do exactly that, since it'll lead us perfectly into the endgame loop, the story's conclusion, and most importantly, Capcom's message. What makes Geismagorm a noteworthy final boss is that it does a great job at demonstrating those ideas we've been going over for the rest of the video, both in the story that it tells and the gameplay of the fight itself. The story is obvious. This monster was foreshadowed as early as the very first urgent quest in Elgato. Then of course we get that cutscene from before to introduce this behemoth who's secretly been controlling the Curio and pulling the strings this entire time. Much like basically every other Monster Hunter game, the guy on the box was mostly innocent. Sorry about that. Anyway, the fight with this thing is great. First, we're asked to use our precision from the gameplay section to break these rocks on specific parts of the monster's body. Each time you do, you'll notice these red rocks falling to the ground. After a while, Geismagorm will begin sucking in everything around it, including those rocks, and if you've broken off enough of them, you get a, say it with me, massive burst of damage and a free knockdown. This attack in particular is especially cool from a show don't tell perspective. So Geismagorm is kinda like a massive parasite, much like the Curio it controls. It sends them out to drain energy from every living thing that they can, then calls them back to consume all of that energy for itself. Here we can see an attack where it's effectively doing just that, sucking in a ton of energy before releasing a powerful explosion. In fact, on the topic of showing the story through the gameplay, you even get to mimic the cutscene here by firing off a signal flare and... yeah, that's pretty cool. Phase 2 is where things get serious though. Realizing the threat that both the Hunter and Fiorane pose, Geismagorm locks in and goes all out, directly showing us where that title of Archdemon comes from. Using the energy the Curio have gathered, it becomes faster, more aggressive, and naturally far more dangerous. It leaps around the arena in motions far too nimble for a creature of this size, and it causes constant explosions to create this chaotic and frantic atmosphere, one that forces you to, once again, carefully consider how and when you use your wire bugs. The most terrifying part of this hunt, however, is when Geismagorm stops attacking you directly and begins scaling the walls of the abyss, attempting to both escape and launch its most powerful attack from above. Here, the fight transitions into a bit of a minigame where you're asked to use these ballistae and target the red spots on the monster's back to knock it down. Now, listen, my aim isn't great by any means, but I have literally never managed to shoot this thing down on my own. And when you fail to shoot it down, it does this.
You become family member to our community. That is the best part.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good spectacle fight,
If you're
that's for
living
sure.
with severe alopecia areata,
I've only
it's
done it
time
like
to
a
grow
couple
out
of times,
loud.
because like, I mean, I got the set, but...
Terrifyingly, the third time it tries to do this, our reinforcements let us know that the ballistae aren't ready yet, meaning we have no way to stop it from climbing out of this hole and onto the... Did you have that in your bag this entire time?
Have what?
That whole launch 50 feet into the air and punch the Elder Dragon off the side of the cliff thing.
Oh, that. Yeah, probably. Why do you ask?
You didn't think to use that earlier when I was shooting worse than Shaquille O'Neal at the free throw line?
Nah, I just didn't think it was important.
You did... Wait a minute. You were just saving it for the end so you could aura farm, weren't you?
I think it's best that we focus on the task at hand for now.
Whatever. So Geismagorm is no more, the credits roll, and that's it, right? Well, the Rise video ended at that point because the endgame for Rise basically is Sunbreak. There was no real reason to go over it. Here, on the other hand, we've got an endgame that is, in my humble opinion, the best in modern Monster Hunter. It's not going to be for everyone, and I'm not here to argue that it's objectively flawless. I instead want to demonstrate how it acts as the perfect culmination of the lessons that we've learned throughout the game thanks to the anomaly system. There are 3 major lessons. First is precision. As we went over before, the game constantly rewards you if you're precise with your attacks by aiming them at just the right spots, and that only becomes more true in the endgame. Equally, you're punished for using your resources recklessly and not planning out how and when it's safe to counter or attack. Second is speed. Monsters in the endgame are faster than ever, so you now need to take full advantage of the speed available to you if you hope to prevail against them. Finally, perhaps the most important lesson, the one that combines both of them, aggression. For this, we need to understand how the anomaly system works. Once again, I'll paraphrase a bit. Some of the Curio escaped the showdown with Geismagorm and went on to try to find a new host. They did so by teaming up with normal monsters to create anomaly monsters. This makes them faster and stronger as you'd expect, but they've also got a cool new mechanic. There are these glowing red orbs on monsters, and upon aiming your attacks directly at these orbs, you can break them and deal a burst of damage. Deal enough damage and you can knock them down and out of their powered up state, leaving them extra vulnerable for a while. However, if you take too long to do this, the monster will instead cause a massive explosion with a guaranteed stun, then follow up with an enhanced version of its strongest move. This combo is basically a death sentence. All of this works together brilliantly to force the player into a more hyper-aggressive playstyle where they're asked to demonstrate their mastery over all of these new abilities that they have access to. Zooming out away from the combat, the endgame grind itself revolves around curious crafting, a system that allows you to upgrade your gear in practically endless ways. You can get new skills, new slots, or just a plain old defense boost. What I especially love about this is that first, you can choose to ignore the RNG altogether and simply upgrade in a more stable and sustainable way that increases your stats without rolling the dice. But second, it's more supplemental than necessary. You don't need the perfect build unless you're a speedrunner going for a world record, and thanks to practically every skill in the game being craftable with decorations, you can actually make a pretty solid build with almost no RNG involved at all. Finally, my personal favorite part of the endgame grind of Sunbreak is that it feels almost like a sequel to Master Rank. Much like how Master Rank saw you refight stronger versions of base game monsters like Izuchi, Aknasam, and Magnamalo, the anomaly upgrades work in the same way. This creates an incredible amount of variety in the monsters that you face as you climb the ranks to create your most powerful gear. To wrap things up, I'd like to address the end of the title updates, since it's here that we can finally get a clear answer to that question from the very start. What was the message Capcom was trying to tell us? With these final monsters, especially that last one, we'll see that the message has been right in front of us this entire time. Remember that big 3 folder? No? I mean, that's fair. It's been like half an hour. I get it. The thing's probably collecting dust at this point. Anyway, it's finally time to unpack it. The final 3 monsters from the title updates act as the perfect finale to Rise and Sunbreak. Let's start with what many consider to be the single hardest boss in the game.
I mean, personally, I put my money on Risen Valstrax, but, you know, Shigaru's
University of
hard
Phoenix
too, I guess.
feels built for real life, because it is. Some schools say
Risen Shigaru Magala. Now, personally, I wouldn't just consider this the hardest boss in Sunbreak, but one of the most challenging bosses in the series. It attacks so frequently, so aggressively, and with so much range that there are often times where you literally can't see what's going on. Remember how at the very start of Rise and early on in that game, it felt like you had tools that the monster couldn't respond to? Well, this feels like it forces you onto the other side. It forces you to see what it's like to be completely overwhelmed by a barrage of attacks that you have no real answer to. It's equal parts exciting and terrifying. Risen Shigaru forces you to fully understand your options at any given moment and will punish mistakes harder than any other boss in the game. It's got this nova where these separate smaller attacks will actually pull you into the main attack if they hit you. They do so with a medium knockdown too, so if you don't have any wire bugs left, you're probably cooked. You really do have to be on your toes for this entire fight, and it's genuinely great. Believe it or not though, I actually think it's the bottom of the big 3 in terms of quality, since the other 2 are some of the best bosses that I've ever encountered.
Well, yeah.
Let's start with Amatsu. Real quick, and stick with me here, you'll see why this is relevant. I want you to think about what you can do with wire bugs. Let's go down the list. You can dash horizontally and upwards while on the ground or in the air, dangle in the air by holding onto a wire bug, wire fall to avoid follow-ups or reposition after getting hit, and use a great wire bug to travel large distances. Now, what if I told you that Amatsu asks you to do all of this? Seriously, I'm not kidding. Check this out. Amatsu has attacks that will pull you towards it with an area-wide vacuum effect. You can't outrun this, but you can use wire bugs to pull yourself away, and if you dangle in the air, you're unaffected by the wind. You can use this ability offensively too. When the boss creates walls of wind, you can use wire bugs to jump over them. So we can check off those two. It's got attacks that send you rocketing into the air before launching out a flurry of tornadoes in your direction. Well, since you're in midair, how are you going to dodge these? Wire bugs, exactly. So that covers aerial movement as well. What about wirefalls? Yeah, it uses those too. It's got this attack that traps you in a massive wind tunnel, forcing you to wirefall at exactly the right moment to dodge its charge. Wirefall too early and you'll hit the walls, wirefall too late and the dragon hits you. Okay, but how could the boss possibly use great wire bugs? I mean, those are for map traversal, and yeah, this might be the greatest boss of all time. I don't know if we'll ever have another boss like Sunbreak Amatsu, a boss that so effortlessly blends together the main gimmick of the game without making it feel like, well, a gimmick. Every portable game, or B-team game, or whatever you want to call these, has some kind of experimental twist or over-the-top mechanic. Yet Amatsu just uses this mechanic so astonishingly well. It acts like the perfect final test for the player, almost like the boss is asking you to demonstrate your mastery over this new movement system. That said, there is another side to wire bugs. If Amatsu asks the player if they've mastered movement, Primordial Malzeno asks them if they've mastered their skills. So let's take a look at how it does this, along with how it outright states that message from the start. Primordial Malzeno has the longest combo in the series, and it's not particularly close either. When it goes into its final state, it has a string of 16 consecutive hits. Interestingly, the entire fight isn't like this. It starts off far more tame. Practically everything Malzeno does has some kind of follow-up, but these attacks are all rather precise and deliberate. It lacks that more frantic, almost feral feel compared to a lot of other monsters you encounter. It's like a proper duel against a knight that just so happens to look like a dragon. You're constantly forced to match this precision in how you utilize your resources. Reckless counters and wirefalls will get you killed here thanks to the follow-ups. And as the fight progresses and the boss begins to get more aggressive, you have to be increasingly careful in how and when you decide to use this extremely valuable resource. On the story side of things, this entire encounter reflects the tragic tale of Malzeno and its relationship with the Curio. As the battle continues, it goes from this regal, distinguished dragon to a bloodlusted monster with exactly one thing on its mind: hurt whatever is currently in front of it. All of this happens directly because of the influence of the Curio. You see, Malzeno wasn't always friendly with these things, nor did it cause the destruction of the Citadel or the massive crater as we're told at the start. That was all the work of Geismagorm. Malzeno is mostly innocent. In fact, it could even be considered a force of good. It fought against and defeated Geismagorm in the past when the Archdemon tried to resurface. However, in doing so, the Curio decided that Malzeno would be a fitting host, eventually turning it into the form that we see in the story of Sunbreak. And that's exactly it. That's the message. The game stresses the importance of understanding before action, of asking why rather than immediately coming to a conclusion before you have the full story. Ironically, this has been the story of basically every Monster Hunter game, and yet still, with each new release, we fail to understand the full context and repeat the exact same cycle time and time and time again. I think the clearest, most simple example of this is the monster count in Wilds. It's basically the same as World, and the roster itself was far more varied, yet countless people still lambasted that game for having a small monster count. Or what about the fact that Wilds was too easy and has ruined Monster Hunter and the series will never be difficult again? Until it was. Or when Rise ruined Monster Hunter and the series would never be difficult again? Until it was. Or when World ruined Monster Hunter, you get it. Now look, do I actually believe that Capcom has been secretly hiding messages to the community in the stories of these games? No, of course not. I mean, I did say at the very start that this conspiracy theory was ridiculous. Equally, am I saying that we should blindly praise everything Capcom drops just because it has Monster Hunter in the title? Come on, were you even listening to the whole don't take action without understanding the full context bit from like 10 seconds ago? No, obviously blind positivity is just as bad as blind negativity. That said, I do believe that the themes of these games and the story that they keep trying to tell us again and again is completely flying over the heads of many who play them. I think that's a real shame too, because if you can stop yourself from judging the book by its cover, if you can look just a little deeper and try to understand these experimental decisions instead of immediately rejecting them, you'll be rewarded with a total package that might not merely be the most misunderstood Monster Hunter game, but the very best.